In this video, we're going to go over all the diseases of the gut, what their symptoms are to help you figure out what gut condition you have so you can start addressing the root cause and so you can get better and live a normal life again. And I used to have a really bad case of Crohn's and colitis, and I've helped many other people get better. I have a free webinar you can watch where I show you pretty much everything I did to get better for free. The first very popular gut issue people have is heartburn. And that's a stupid name because the heart's not burning. It's called stomach ulcers. It also can go by H. pylori or acid reflux or GERD. So the ulcers, when you think stomach ulcers, you think they would be down here because the acid is hanging out down there. No. The ulcers only form at the top of the stomach. And the majority of those ulcers actually happen most of them happen right here. And this is kind of known to be caused or made at least worse by stress. But the main symptom to whether you have heartburn, stomach ulcers, H. pylori, GERD, is a burning sensation. Burning. Like it's gonna burn. It also might switch between a burning pain and a pressure pain where it's almost like being pinched. Vomiting, acid reflux, the indigestion, it just feels like, it's just sitting in my stomach. It won't move. So those are the typical, and depression might also be factored into this as well. So those are the main symptoms if you have stomach ulcers or H. pylori. These are going to be your main symptoms. Now let's go on to the next part of the digestive system. Right here we have the duodenum. And they call it the duodenum because I guess it's 12 finger lengths long. That's what the word is supposed to mean. And the main disease there that shows up there are ulcers. Stomach ulcers and duodenal ulcers are almost the same thing. Then we get to the first part of the small intestine. I guess the duodenum is the first part, but this next part is called the duodenum or duodenum. It's Latin. You'll not hear many people talk about that. But if this part of the small intestine is inflamed, which you can only find through an MRI because it's just so, or in a capsule endoscopy. And also the way that you would know if you have stomach ulcers, like you will know you could figure that out just by the symptoms, honestly, but they'll stick a camera down here really easy and be able to see what's going on. And also note that sometimes these ulcers are microscopic, so they wouldn't be able to see them, when they stick the camera down there. But the burning pain is very distinct. People do not talk about the duodenum, but the symptoms to this would be diarrhea and just pain, but not a burning pain. This burning pain is very distinct. And then we get here to the ileum, the last part of the small intestine. Now, again, you can only see this with a capsule endoscopy or an MRI, and sometimes they can shove a camera up here far enough just to see the very end of the small intestine, of the ileum. Now, in a perfect world, the way that I wish they would, all these words are Latin for, hey, this part, the colon, is inflamed, so let's just call it colitis. Now, in order to understand what these diseases are, you really need to understand what inflammation is, which your GI doctor or your holistic person you're seeing, coach you're seeing, they don't know what inflammation is. Inflammation is your body's response to injury. This is the most, like, super important. If I punch myself, right, it's going to become inflamed to heal the injury. So when the colon is inflamed, you don't sit there and you go, how do I suppress that healing response? It's like if firefighters were to show up to the fire and you're like killing the firefighters and shooting, arrest that firefighter, he caused the fire. No, so the inflammation is trying to heal injury at the site of the inflammation is just trying to heal injury. So we need to ask ourselves the question, what is injuring our gut? So here we have the main term you're going to hear nowadays is Crohn's disease. This is a dumb term. It was discovered by Dr. Burrell Crohn, and he did not want to call it Crohn's disease. He yelled at them for years. I think he passed away, but he like mainly practiced in the 50s, and he was like, please don't call it Crohn's. Please don't call it Crohn's. Please don't call it Crohn's. Call it regional ileitis, because I wanted to describe it when someone has inflammation in their small intestine. But if you read Crohn's disease on WebMD and on Wikipedia and the Mayo Clinic, it's like, it roughly says inflammation anywhere from mouth to butthole. But it normally gets diagnosed when they do an MRI or they do a colonoscopy and they find inflammation here or somewhere in the small intestine. And so the symptoms for Crohn's disease are, again, diarrhea, pain. We could also say weight loss, because you're not absorbing, everything's just going straight into the toilet. We could also say fevers, if you have a lot of fevers, night sweats. And now you'll see a lot of other symptoms, such as like mouth ulcers, fistulas and hemorrhoids and fissures. These are not part of Crohn's disease. They're separate conditions. And I know this isn't what modern medicine says. These are they're two separate tissues found on separate sides of the body. You'll also hear a new term that's used by the holistic community called SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. So there's an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. The symptoms for that are food intolerances, diarrhea, pain. Constipation could also be in here. I know this is kind of getting a little convoluted, but here we have the colon. Where is the inflammation in the colon? If it's here, so this is the ascending, the transverse, and the descending in the sigmoid, because it's shaped like an S. So if somebody has inflammation everywhere in their colon, they call it pancolitis. If somebody has ulcers in their colon, they call it ulcerative colitis. If somebody has pockets in their colon, they call it diverticulosis. If these pockets are inflamed, they call it diverticulitis. And then there's also something called microscopic colitis, where they can't see the inflammation with the naked eye. You know, they can only see it if you do like a biopsy and you look at it underneath a microscope. That's when you can see the inflammation, and that's when you can see the damage. We also have anal fissures. These are where fissures, these ulcers, form in your rectum. And they're very similar to stomach ulcers, where they burn. They burn really bad. But then you have hemorrhoids, they're like these little sags of skin that can come out down past your butt, and they can itch and be irritated and inflamed. That some people will clump that together with, oh, colitis, hemorrhoids. No, they're two separate conditions involving separate bodily tissues. Even though they're side by side, they're two separate tissues. This is the rectum this involves the rectum surface mucosa, and this colitis involves the intestinal mucosa. So you also have appendicitis, which is like the first part of the colon, and a lot of times you just cut that out. When someone that happens, they have fistulas, where it's like, so you have these perianal ducts that come around your butthole. You know when animals go and they sniff each other's butts? They're sniffing they're sniffing a whole bunch of things, but the perianal ducts are involved with that. But what happens is an abscess forms in those tiny ducts, and then it just rips the duct apart, and you get this big tract, and it just oozes pus and blood. So I guess we could also put an anal abscess down there too. And again, if you have a fistula or hemorrhoid, and then you have inflammation in the small intestine, they love to call it Crohn's. But they're two separate conditions. And now I'm going to kind of explain this from what I call a German New Medicine perspective. This was created by Dr. Hammer. It's like Ayurvedic medicine. It's like a different way of doing medicine and looking at how the body works. German New Medicine, he wanted to call it the new medicine because it's just how the body works. He could look at your brain CT scan and know exactly what was wrong with you. And so here, somebody who has hemorrhoids might be super manic, by the way. Depressive, manic. So he saw that all these conditions started with a traumatic event. And that's what they believed in the 1970s, 60s, 50s, and before. They knew that these gut issues all started with a traumatic event. And Dr. Hammer, he gave them, he like labeled the conflict that puts each of these organs into overdrive and gives you symptoms. So for heartburn or stomach ulcers and H. pylori, the conflict for this is territorial anger. Anger in the territory. And very rarely it's an identity conflict. I don't know what territory I belong to. But 75% of the time, for men, it's always a territorial anger. For women, it's 50-50 whether it's going to be an identity. And that's very complicated stuff that I'd have to talk to somebody one-on-one to figure out what's going on. When the conflict is active, you're going to feel burning pain. And when someone resolves the conflict, they're going to feel a pressure pain. It's cell minus in the conflict active phase and cell restoration in the healing phase. In the H. pylori, somebody could have high H. pylori numbers and not have symptoms. That's because, or moderate symptoms, that's because H. pylori is doing most of its work when we have resolved the conflict and it's restoring the cell loss. Well, it's normally down here. And there's a lot of, this is a whole nother video to deal with heartburn. This is like kind of just, this video is just kind of to help you like figure out like what's going on in the gut and just give you a good idea what's going on. So this part of the digestive system, the conflict is I can't digest this or I can't absorb it. Something important to my survival like money or girls, I can't, and that might sound funny, but I know this one girl or woman, when she talks about the guys that she likes, she goes, he looks so tasty. I can't wait to get my lips on him. Something like that. Think about animals. They're constantly interacting with the world as if everything is like food. Handle everything with their mouth. And so I can't digest and absorb something important to my survival. So that is, and it's described here for people with Crohn's. I can't digest and absorb something important to my survival. and I'm angry and frustrated and annoyed that I can't digest and absorb it, or maybe get might resonate with you better. Celiac is a whole new video. That's a whole separate video to get to celiac disease. But again, celiac is Greek for abdominal. So it just used to be a term used to say, oh, he has gut issues, right? Whereas now today, for some reason, they decided, and there's a whole history, it's really dumb why they decided to make it gluten intolerance. Celiac starts with a traumatic event. I can't digest something important to my survival, and I'm angry, upset, and frustrated about it. And then, so we're digesting our food, we're absorbing our food, absorbing every last little bit of it. Then here, it's like almost physical crap. And so the conflict for colitis is, what is crap I want to get rid of, but I can't. And so here, during the conflict active phase, for both the small intestine and the large intestine, there's cell proliferation. And that might sound crazy, but when you look at your colonoscopy, they're gonna say something like thickening of the intestinal walls, or polyps. Dr. Hammer tested, the cauliflower-looking ones, and he said the digestive juices that they produce digested food 10 times faster than other foods. And so when we're conflict active, you won't have symptoms. There's this piece of crap, I want to get rid of them, but I can't. Then when you finally get rid of that piece of crap, then the body goes, okay, these cells are high maintenance, we need to get rid of them, and it starts to break them down with the help of Candida, E. coli, and C. diff, and then that's when you start to get the symptoms of blood and diarrhea. There's also, like, the brain has to run in overdrive to put these organs into overdrive, and that is when you get a fever. It's when the conflict gets resolved and there's actually healing happening on the brain. The night sweats are, again, when we resolve the conflict and we're getting rid of these extra cells, and like the trash is kind of coming through our skin of all this work. A fistula is, I believe, crap. I can't get rid of this crap fast enough. I want to separate from this crap. A fissures and hemorrhoids are two different sides of the coin. Fissures are conflict active, cell loss, cell loss, cell loss. And then, and it's to widen the anus so we can mark our territory better, spray it with poop better. That's the biological purpose of this. And then the hemorrhoids are cell restoration to fill in the fissures and fix them. But then the hemorrhoids form when it's like back and forth, off and on, and it turns into a mess. The conflict for this is usually an identity conflict, especially for women, an identity conflict, and then it could be also a territorial anger for a man. And now I'm going to give you kind of an example of each. So for hemorrhoids, I've seen one guy, his wife left him, like he never had hemorrhoids ever, and then one day his wife got really mad at him and like took the kids and left, and that's when he first got a hemorrhoid. The hemorrhoid showed up when they patched things up and she came back, but they were kind of still fighting off and on, and that's when the hemorrhoids started to pop up for this guy. Colitis, I've seen one guy get colitis when his parents were going through a divorce in high school, and then he would later on get into flares later on in life when he was going through like stressful breakups of his own. Crohn's disease, mine was like I couldn't digest video games as a kid. Like if somebody was like trying to take away my video games, I would just get super angry and have tons of diarrhea. Stomach ulcers. One guy got stomach ulcers when he was living he just rented an apartment, and the landlord was like hey, no smoking. Hey, you're playing your music too loud. And he's like, I'm not doing, why are you yelling at me? I'm not doing it. Like his landlord was really bad and he had heartburn, but then the heartburn stopped when the lease was up and he moved. And then it kind of turned into H. pylori because the next place he moved into in gastritis. This could also be gastritis right here as well because kind of the same situation was going on with his landlord. I have so much more details in my free webinar. I have a lot more like pictures and lab studies to support this. If you want to do what I did to get better, use my 13-day protocol. And I go over all the details on what's in this in my free webinar. It's better than most people's paid programs.